how's it going there, folks? I haven't made you guys a video in a long time. This is a request video. My man O asked me to make it, and it's just about. He basically asked me to make the video about the Nazi influence on the transgender culture. Now, first of all, I want to say there's nothing wrong with a transsexual. And there's nothing wrong with anybody being a transsexual. Nothing wrong with anybody being gay. I'm not gay, but there's nothing wrong with it. What's natural and normal is love. So however people express that, that's how they express it. And humans are sexual beings. So however you express your sexuality, that's how you express it. I remember a funny quote from Dennis Miller one time. He said, I don't know what you fuck, but whatever you fuck, I hope you fuck it often. Pretty funny. But to get serious, this is a good topic. This is a good video to make for you. So I guess we'll just start back basically before World War I, and we'll start with drugs. And you see in Germany, Bayer company, the one that makes Bayer aspirin, and Merck Corporation, Merck, M-E-R-C-K, which is a pharmaceutical, a huge pharmaceutical conglomerate in the world, multinational. They experimented with synthesizing certain drugs, and now people believe that Sasha Shulgin is the person that first synthesized the drug MDMA or ecstasy, but that's not true. He just resynthesized it on his own because he's a scientist. But the Merck Corporation and Bayer were the first companies to synthesize MDMA, methyl dimethylamphetamine. And what MDMA does, curiously, is it speeds up your cognitive system. So it speeds it up. Okay. So what that does is when it speeds it up, that increases your cognitive capability. In other words, it increases your ability to be aware, your awareness. Okay. So you can absorb more information in a waking cognitive position. So instead of, like, for instance, Carl Sagan wrote this book called Dragons of Eden, Speculations on the Origins of Human Intelligence. And now intelligence only means to gather information. You always see the colloquial term for intelligence is that, you're saying someone's smart, they're intelligent. You speak intelligently. That's really a misnomer, technically, because intelligence only means to gather information. That's the reason why the intelligence agencies are called the intelligence agencies, because they gather intelligence, they gather information. So when you change your cognitive speed, there's multiple ways you can change it, but one of the best ones they ever found out was, and other people too, is to just use supplements to change your cognitive speed. And you can change your speed so much until you can change it out of this dimension. So we live in this certain frequency band of the third dimension, and you can take certain drugs, and almost every drug, if you take it at a certain dosage, it'll expand your cognition out of this dimension and into the next dimension, which is the fourth dimension. So now you have a increased capacity to perceive, okay? And you can perceive things that are not necessarily in this dimension, but are directly connected to it, right out of sight of the majority of people. But that doesn't mean that those things that you can't see don't affect your cognitive system in this particular dimension. And like I said, Carl Sagan wrote that book called The Dragons of Eden, Speculation on the Origins of Human Intelligence. And in that book, he simply revealed that the waking human cognition, waking human consciousness, can see about 5 million bits of information per second. But outside of what you can actually perceive, your optic nerve can see 5 billion bits of information per second. And it can take that information and through the optic nerve into the DNA. So if you were a computer, the DNA would be the operating system. And then if you were a computer, the RNA would be the hard drive where you would store the information, or you would store the input data. Okay? So the 5 billion bits of information goes in and is stored into the RNA. Now it's stored as a program on your hard drive, but you can only perceive 5 million bits of information when 5 billion, 100 more times of information has been taken into your genetics. Now, current linguistic theory states that, this is from Noam Chomsky, he's considered to be the most revolutionary linguist of our time, and he says that language is generative. Now that coincides and goes along with the Bible, where the Bible says the Word was made flesh. And then that coincides with the oldest languages, the oldest language, which is hieroglyphic language. That's a symbol language. Now they're going to say cuneiform is the oldest because the crackers are in the middle of trying to prove that, you know, Samaria and ancient Turkey are the oldest places on the planet and all that bullshit. Okay, but the cuneiform is not the oldest. It's a symbol language. Symbol, so quote unquote, a picture's worth 1,000 words. In other words, more information is going into the cognitive system. All right. So what that means, if language is generative, is that all language, with the Bible, the words made flesh, all language affects genetics. All input data affects the genetics. So you only have to find out. Now, where was the first place the Nazis went when they went around the world trying to dominate the earth, and they were looking for they were looking for their Aryan roots, you know, so they were trying to find the origins of Jesus, you know. And there's a story in Tibet, and the first place they went was Tibet. And there's a story in Tibet of an avatar, which is like a Christ, a divine being, being lost for 13 years, they can't find, you know, his information is kind of spurious, kind of muddled for 13 years. And that kind of goes right along with the story of Jesus, is that, you know, the lost years of Jesus. And the Nazis, you know, like I said, they're incredible analyzers because they are increasing and enhancing their cognitive system. And like I said, Bayer and Merck, when they first developed MDMA, they developed it for the express purpose of psychic warfare. So that's really increasing the cognition beyond this dimension. Okay. In other words, being able to see into things. Okay. So they determined from having increased cognition through use of drugs that their origins, the Aryan origins, came from Tibet. Okay, so they went to Tibet. All right, and remember Hitler's supposed to have the sword of Jesus or the scepter of Jesus or the whatever the fuck it's called. You know what I'm talking about? The goddamn the sword or the scepter of Jesus or whatever the fuck. Okay, So they're trying to connect their Führer, see, to Jesus. And they want Jesus to be Aryan. Now, the question is, was Jesus Aryan? Absolutely. And so they want Jesus to be blonde hair, blue eyed. Was Jesus blonde hair, blue eyed? Absolutely. You have to understand, when you're dealing with Jesus, Jesus can be any fucking thing he wants to be. You see what I'm saying? Because he's here to save people. So it ain't gonna make it rocket science. He's gonna appear to you what you need him to appear as. So if you need him to appear as a white hair, blue eyed, blonde hair cracker, that's what he's gonna appear to you as. He's here to save you. See? And he's especially here to save white people. To save white people from white evil. That's the whole purpose of Jesus. There's no other purpose. And then so, that's why even the word Aisu in Sanskrit interprets as dragon. It interprets as snake, lizard, reptile. And that tells you that's for white people. He's here to save white people from their own evil. Yeah. So, and did it work? Yeah, it worked. I mean, you have to choose it. You have to connect to it yourself. You have to actually, that's why you hear when people go to church, I don't go to church, I'm not religious, but when people go to church, they're like, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. That shit's all true. Because that's what Jesus is for white people. Their Lord and Savior. They're to save them from their associations to the animal kingdom. Like, for instance, still talking about Germany. Like in today's Germany, they have brothels, literal brothels. That's a house of prostitution for animal sex. You can go in Germany somewhere to a place and pay money, and instead of fucking a bitch, you can get fucked by a horse or a dog or an animal. You can have sex with an animal or a sheep or a goat or whatever. And there ain't no place in the world, that niggas is doing that shit. What's that tell you? Now, does that make white people bad or whatever? It doesn't really make them bad. It's a long story as to why that's like that. But it definitely belies the fact that white culture will pretty much always breed evil. It will, in the end, it will always breed destruction. Because that's a step back evolutionary. You see, so it's a long story as to why white supremacy exists too. But make a long story short. So the Nazis, after they went to Tibet looking for their Aryan roots, they said, well, all right, so they figured out, that stuff. And then they figured out the next connection in the dots. And the next connection in the dots was off to Egypt. And they went to a place called Tanis. Now, Tanis is the place where most of the biblical patriarchs that are in the Bible were headquartered. And the majority of them were Egyptian pharaohs or high Egyptian royalty. Or they were priests way up in the Egyptian priestcraft. I mean, high the fuck up there. Like, for instance, Abraham was a high Egyptian priest. Saul, St. Paul was a high Egyptian priest. And these priests were, not all of them, but the majority of them were after the order of what's called Menashe. And they're Mithra priests. They're Mithra cultists. Mithra is, you heard of Mithra, Mithraism, Mithra. And that just simply means, it's just an epithet for the myth of the sun god. So the myth of the sun god Ra, and it's a very, very high form and intellectual form of Satanism. It's the application of astronomical and astrological data to a real person. And so you can, when you take that and you go by the equinoxes and the processions and stuff like that, it starts to get fuzzy, because you have real avatars, you have real people who are quote unquote saviors of the time that will be born, that their incarnation can be tracked. See? Same thing, make you laugh, make you cry. So at the same time, you take that astrological and astronomical data and you apply that to the real avatar. And then you can make every single avatar that was ever born look like the exact same person. And that's what they do. And you hear them say, oh, Jesus was this person, that person, this person, that person, this person, and that person. And you can look and tell by the constellations that that's true, and blah, 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 blah. And they may even connect a real Jesus incarnation to another real Jesus incarnation. That's the genius of that shit. But that's also the reason why, at a certain point, you're supposed to graduate from religion. You're supposed to. And if you don't, it becomes, like I'm telling you, it becomes a system of slavery. It becomes a system of mind control. You know, like, is religion good? Fuck yeah, it's good. I mean, all of them, the majority of them are based on the golden rule. I mean, at their very core, they're just based on the golden rule. So you're supposed to learn it and graduate from it. You're supposed to shed the skin. Like, you're supposed to get to a point where you don't need it anymore. Okay. But people have this reliance on it so deeply embedded in their genetics on this planet. So the Nazis just, you know, they just took advantage of all that. And so what they realized was, in the folklore, the ancient folklore, the basis of the stories, you know, that are attached to the religions, there were certain elements that they found out would be deeply embedded in the genetic memory. Now, genetics are proven to have a memory. And then, of course, IQ is tied to memory. So you can have genetic memory, plus you can have genetic intelligence. See? Another long story. But, so the Nazis figured out that through linguistics, there's 3 levels to basically the energetics of the psychological makeup of a human being. Now, keep in mind, I say energetics. So you've got the waking consciousness, the subconscious, which is right below, and then you've got the unconscious, which is something you're just not conscious of, but still, in a linguistic sense, it has to have an effect upon your genetics. And then current linguistic theory, syntactic structure by Noam Chomsky also identifies that you have the surface structure, the underlying structure, and the deep structure of every sentence. See? And also, the Toltec said that you have the first attention, which is our waking attention, our waking cognition. The second attention, which is more ephemeral and more cartoon-like. And then you have what they call the third attention, which is unknowable. And then remember, Sigmund Freud said the same thing. He said that, I don't really like Freud all that much, but he said that we had the conscious, the unconscious, and the id, or the superconscious. See? And Carl Jung, who I do like, said basically the same thing as Freud, but to me he identified it better. He said that we have the conscious, the unconscious, and the collective unconscious. And he called the collective unconscious the devil. So the Nazis were able to figure all this out, and they delved into the collective unconscious, where all these archetypes, that's basic impressions, basic genetic impressions for linguistic data input, just lying dormant. And it's there. It's legitimately there because, as in a collective sense, humans have had all these experiences throughout their history. Some of these experiences have a greater impact because there was more focus and activity on these particular experiences. So these can be called archetypes. Now Jung said that, say in reference to example, for instance, when people have relationships with each other, romantic relationships, he said most people go for the basic impression. They go for the archetype. He said, but the archetype's not true love. So in other words, people are just playing a role based upon what the external pressure of society, the coerciveness, the coercive external pressure of society says that they're supposed to be participating in. So you're supposed to be doing this at this time, that at this time, this at this time. You're supposed to be at this level at that time, and blah, 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 blah. But the best person, the best two people to ever explain white consciousness to me was, one, Rudolf Steiner, and two, Carl Jung. Rudolf Steiner said that the analytical mind can be led around with useless facts, and that fact-based learning makes the learner angry internally. And then Carl Jung came along and he said that when he was trying to cure Europeans of mental illness, even just light mental illness, neurosis, all the way to psychosis and pathological murderous behavior, he couldn't cure any of them because he said that on the inside, deep down, they were all angry, perverted, and fragmented. So in other words, they're being influenced from the collective unconscious archetypes. They're connected to these things. Like I said, he called the collective unconscious the devil. But they're not aware of it because they're not in touch with it, because they're only taught to stay on the surface on a conscious level, which takes us right back there to Carl Jung. To Carl Sagan. So you're aware of 5 million bits of information per second, but you're being influenced by 5 billion bits of information per second. See? And so the biggest tool that they have now for mind control is the television. The TV is so effective at coercion and the indoctrination system until they don't really have to do anything. Like in America, for instance, the TV is so effective at mind controlling other people until they don't have to do it physically. They don't have to beat you over the head with a club or a baseball bat or anything like that. Because as long as you watch that television, like Noam Chomsky said, you are exposed to this formula called the Mohawk Valley formula. And that formula is a formula to curb any dissent from a system of indoctrination and coercion of concentrated power in the hands of the few, so that the many don't dissent against it, don't dissent against that format. Okay. So now this is the reason why, for the mind control system to work properly, for it to ever work right, the dominant race, the key race, the master race has to be the white race. That's what the elites want, and that's what the elites prefer. And the reason why they want and prefer that is because white people have certain strengths. Now, you look for people's weaknesses, right? But Let's let that go and say they don't have any weaknesses. Let's say they only have strengths, just for the sake of argument. And let's say those strengths are that they're analytical, they're highly intelligent, and they love categories and definitions. They have to define everything and put everything into a category. And they're OCD with it. I mean, these motherfuckers will make a special boat, submarine, get in the ocean just to go study one goddamn little barnacle that lives, 95 feet down the coral, on a coral reef. And they'll do that shit. That's how they are. See? So let's call that a strength. So, but that's also the reason why they're easily used. See? Like I said, back to Rudolf Steiner, he said that the analytical mind can be led around with useless facts. And it creates anger internally. The fact-based learning creates anger internally to the learner. Now, if you're angry internally, you're not connected to what we call, quote unquote, the spirit, because that nixes it, that negates your ability to be connected. This is why the white race is so important to the mind control system. Because what you have is you have an entire group of people connected to psychic energy, or we can call that, right now it's being turned to a different name. We can call that the artificial intelligence. We have an entire group of people connected to psychic energy, and you can lead their minds around with facts and make them think they're connected to God, and they're not. They're connected to the devil as a group. And that's what's going on. So, in the highest levels of the Nazi setup, they get connected to secret societies. And in the highest levels of those secret societies, almost every secret society, let's call Freemasonry the main one, but almost in Rosicrucians, all of them, in the highest level of the secret society, the perfected being is transgender or is hermaphrodite. As a matter of fact, some of the secret societies call Jesus the divine hermaphrodite, the divine androgyne. Okay. So there's a little known secret that most people don't realize, is that in the secret societies, at the highest level of them, now they run the world, okay, and mainly through the Jesuits, and they teach us to worship God. Okay, God needs to be worshipped or whatever. Now, which is bullshit, because if you're God, what the fuck do you need to be worshipped for? If you're God, you don't even have a fucking ego. You don't need that shit. But they teach you that God is anthropomorphized. In other words, God is just like you and all your little petty outlooks and shit. But he's just more powerful. You know what I'm saying? Which isn't true. Okay. And what they do is behind the scenes is they worship the goddess. See, so it's a long story to that. But they see the perfect blending of everything they worship, everything they do, and what you do is to merge the two seeming opposites of polarity. So one being the feminine principle and the other one being the masculine principle. Now, they understand it all because they've been studying it all this time. They got super scientists, they got super psychiatrists, they got super everything, analyzing all this shit for years and years and years and years and years, doing all these secret experiments and secret occult rituals with masks and dances and drugs, and they done this shit thousands and thousands of times, and they know what the outcome is going to be because they tested it in every scenario. So now what they're doing is Well, they first learned about it in the death camps, and where they learned about it was they were studying Kabbalah, which of course is a system of language, okay, which is a system of hieroglyphs, a moving hieroglyph. Keep in mind that TV is a moving hieroglyph, okay, and they found out that Kabbalah has an incredible effect on the cognition, has an effect on people's behavior, has an effect on lots of different things, and especially even genetics. In other words, you can get certain results from certain Kabbalistic configurations in tandem with people's genetics and the results. So they found that out. And then they found this little Jewish boy who was about 7 years old, and he was a savant at Kabbalah, a savant. He was like a genius at it. And they learned every single thing about Kabbalah from him. Now, then of course they're killing all the Jews, so they're eliminating the evidence of where they're getting their information. And they also did that with this particular scientist that they had working for them. His name was Wilhelm Reich. And Wilhelm Reich was he was a contemporary of Freud and Jung and Einstein. But Wilhelm Reich was smarter than them. But Wilhelm Reich was said to be a quack. But if he was a quack, then why did the Nazis use all his shit? If he was a quack, then why is his name mentioned in the patent of all these high-tech devices around the world? Like the U.S. Air Force Cloudbuster, like the HAARP device, HAARP device, the CERN, Large Hadron Collider. Why is his name and other stuff, why is his name mentioned in the patent of all this shit? But he died in New York, in prison, as a quack, because he was making claims that this thing called an orgone accumulator could cure people. And Einstein did an experiment on the orgone accumulator, and he determined that it didn't work. But later on, he actually admitted he did the experiment incorrect. He redid it, and he said it did work, but the public damage was already done, see. So, Wilhelm Reich's biggest claim to fame was what was called orgone research, orgone. And that's, what he's saying is that, in orgone research, he's saying that organic, like us, objects have a positive charge that surrounds them, a positive electrical charge. And inanimate, you know, like this camera or whatever, have a negative electrical charge. All right, so all his information was based on that. And he wrote these books and he did all this research. Now you just think it's called orgone, organic, orgasm, see? So it's sex related, no matter what. And he's the only scientist that said all neurosis, every mental illness, period, is tied to sexual repression and dysfunction. I know it seems like I'm jumping around, but I'm not. Okay. So they used, in tandem with Kabbalah, the Nazis, in tandem with Wilhelm Reich's orgone research, and in tandem with some of the psychological concepts they came up with, plus the experimentation that the chief Nazi scientist, Dr. Josef Mengele, was doing in the Nazi death camps on the prisoners. They came up with all this stuff, man, and they came up with mass programs to execute the system of the highest being at the highest level of the secret societies, of the occult system. You can call it Freemasonry or whatever you want to call it, but they found a way to execute that program and to put ideological, by data input, transsexualism into society. Now, not only ideologically, so if they do it ideologically, all of a sudden what will happen is you'll have a bunch of people that just out the clear blue turn around and go, hey, you know what? I've been thinking, I'm not really a guy. I'm a girl on the inside. Because the archetypal data input that they're receiving in symbol language, that the Nazis went to Tibet and they went to Egypt and they learned all about the symbols and they learned about Kabbalah, and then they had the Oregon information and they put it all together and they found out that that was the way to control the situation, because the Tibetans taught the Nazis that the two strongest forces in the universe are the imagination and the sex drive. So they found out they don't have to beat anybody over the head to control them. They only have to control their minds and the input data to their cognition. The rest will go down into the program, get stored in the RNA as a program. And then you only have to bring the program up with codes or keystrokes or triggers. And then what do you get? You get people dyeing their hair blue, dyeing their hair red, dyeing their hair green, putting all these nose rings in, getting all these fucked up tattoos on their bodies and shit like that. Because now that program is stored inside. And it can be triggered to come out at any time through the external coercive data input of the general media, especially television. You see? So the Nazis, people think that they lost the war, and they really didn't. They didn't need to win the war on the surface. Even in, for instance, one of the first experiments they ever did was Bolshevism, was during the Russian Revolution, when Lenin, Trotsky, and Marx took over. Bolshevism actually came out of, Jewish Bolshevism actually came out of came out of Germany. It wasn't a Nazi party yet, but that's where the rudiments of it was there. And that's where it came from. A good scholar knows that. You know what I mean? So, all experimentation, see? And so when the war was over, and the Nazis really won, the declaration that the Nazis won the war was the quote-unquote creation of the state of Israel, through the Balfour Declaration written to Lord Rothschild from Lord Balfour in Great Britain, which really actually disbanded the state of Israel. It disbanded the state of Israel. And in favor of the quote-unquote New World Order. The Nazi New World Order. See? So they don't have to win the war on the surface. Because as soon as the war was over, what happened? They brought all their scientists, all their psychiatrists, all their doctors that worked in the Nazi system, in the death camps, and they brought them over to America and installed them into our NASA, NASA, the CIA, the intelligence agency, our mental health care system. So you only have to control a certain amount of things. And then the rest of them were known to go down where? To South America. So now you get down to South America and you get this movie that gets made later on about this movie called The Boys from Brazil. And all that shit has to be true.